What happens when the underground just wins? Not gets popular, not goes mainstream, actually wins. It becomes an institution, it takes to the boardroom, it files a quarterly report. Because that's what just happened on June 15th, 2026, when Human Made Inc. announced it was acquiring 100% of Undercover, like Jun Takahashi 1990 Undercover. The two guys at the center of this deal once shared a storefront in the back alleys of Harajuku. And 30 years later, nowhere has become everywhere. Before we get into the mechanics, if you enjoy exploring Japanese culture, history, and systems behind fashion, consider subscribing. We're refining the mission here at The Casual to bring you closer to the hidden knowledge of Tokyo, and your support genuinely helps us build that network. With that said, back to the episode. So to understand why any of this matters, you have to understand what Urahara actually was. It was the home of a cluster of micro boutiques that operated on rules completely alien to the fashion industry as it existed at the time, even in Japan. It was limited production runs, single storefronts, no wholesale, no licensing. Physical localized scarcity was the product. NIGO and Jun Takahashi co-founded Nowhere in April of 1993. Two punk-obsessed kids with strong taste and very limited budget. NIGO would go on to build the Bathing Ape, as many of you know, into one of the most globally recognized streetwear brands of its era. Takahashi would build Undercover into one of the most critically respected avant-garde labels, not only in Japanese fashion, but in global fashion in general. So why does this all matter? Why is this important? Well, Human Made Inc., NIGO's publicly traded company, announced a binding agreement to acquire 100% of Undercover's outstanding shares. Takahashi, who has held 80% of that equity, and his co-shareholder Hiroshi Takahashi, who held the remaining 20%, both agreed to divest. The deal is scheduled to formally execute in early 2027, folding Undercover into Human Made's consolidated financials starting Q1 of fiscal year 2028. That's the fashion business clinical version. And here's the version that really matters. Undercover was the last great independent holdout of the 1990s Urahara wave. A Bathing Ape, NIGO's own original brand, had already been acquired by Hong Kong's IT group years prior. Other foundational labels from that era had either dissolved entirely or been absorbed by large domestic trading houses or other big groups. Undercover was the anomaly, an independent, Paris runway, high design label that had survived for over 3 decades without ceding control to anyone. Until now. And the point is, it didn't get absorbed by an outside force. It got absorbed by its own. The same person who was in the room at the beginning is the one executing the buyout, or at least the main person behind Human Made Inc. So why can NIGO even do this? You have to understand what Human Made Inc. actually is. Because from the outside, it reads just like a simple streetwear brand. But inside, it's something significantly more sophisticated. Human Made has grown its annual sales exceeding 14 billion yen. Operating profit margins consistently between 20 and 30%, which for fashion is very exceptional. And perhaps the most telling number, overseas sales from Human Made, including inbound tourist purchases, reached 64% of total revenue in the fiscal year ending January 2025. That last figure is the one to sit with. Nearly 2/3 of Human Made's revenue comes from outside Japan. The brand has built an international consumer base, particularly in South Korea, where its alignment with K-pop figures like BTS's J-Hope, which has created a digital native, high-spending audience without ever losing its cultural center of gravity that's based in Tokyo. And that's before you account for the network itself. You see, NIGO is currently the artistic director of Kenzo under LVMH. His long-standing collaboration with Pharrell Williams is there, who now serves as creative director of Louis Vuitton Men's. He appointed the graphic artist Verdi as Human Made's artistic director, which keeps the brand's visual language plugged into the current generation of Japanese creative culture. These aren't marketing relationships, they're distribution pipelines. When Human Made launches a partnership, it moves a product at scale with almost no traditional marketing spend. The brand generates revenue by converting NIGO's personal cultural equity, accumulated over 30 years, into predictable corporate income. You see where this is all going? This is insane. That's the machine that funded the acquisition of Undercover. which makes the IPO of Human Made Inc., which some Western observers call disappointing based on early stock price movement or was a bad idea, look completely different once you understand what the capital was actually for. It was not an exit. It was a war chest. Now, immediately, we have to look at the comparison that actually unlocks what NIGO is building. For decades, the dominant model of survival for avant-garde Japanese fashion houses was the one that Kawakubo constructed at Comme des Garçons. Comme des Garçons Play, for instance, generates the reliable revenue. The runway generates the cultural credibility. Dover Street Market provides the distribution platform. The clothes could take risks because the infrastructure guaranteed survival. NIGO is building the same thing, one layer at a time, doing it with distinctively a different cultural toolkit than Kawakubo-san. NIGO's model is Asia first. It's Tokyo anchored, Seoul amplified, digitally native, and increasingly independent of traditional Western gatekeeping infrastructure that controlled Japanese fashion's global reach for decades. Where Kawakubo built stability around sub-brands, NIGO has built it around a lifestyle matrix. His partnership with Blue Bottle Coffee created a co-branded cafe experience in Kyoto and Harajuku. His appointment in early 2025 as creative director of Family Mart, Japan's ubiquitous convenience store chain, produced the convenience wear line where he hired Fosatasm's Hiromichi Ochiai to design the whole thing. So this means that you can go to Family Mart and spend 500 yen on some Family Mart convenience wear socks, or several $1,000s on an undercover runway jacket that lives in the same corporate portfolio. That's NIGO. And this is where the deeper significance of the undercover acquisition lands. The historical pattern in Japanese fashion has been brutal in its consistency. An independent label grows, it achieves global recognition, reaches the limits of self-financing can sustain, and then it gets acquired by a Western private equity or a non-endemic Japanese conglomerate or a global luxury house with no real fluency in what made the brand worth acquiring in the first place. Creative direction shifts, distribution gets rerouted, the brand loses whatever made it interesting, while the acquirer extracts whatever commercial value was left in the game. It actually happened to individuals like Yohji Yamamoto, who went through it very early when his business was going crazy. And we all know the story of A Bathing Ape and what it went through. Same thing. The pattern isn't an accident. It's a feature of a global fashion economy that consistently undervalues the cultural specificity of Japanese design. NIGO's acquisition of Undercover is a deliberate argument against that pattern. Money generated from within the culture, deployed by people who built it, managed by people who understand the value. It is fundamentally a different kind of ownership. Jun Takahashi doesn't even lose creative control. The only thing he loses is the financial volatility and logistical overhead of running an independent Paris runway operation, which is genuinely exhausting and genuinely low margin. What he gains is human-made's back-end infrastructure, consolidated logistics, global digital distribution, and corporate stability, enough to weather the disruptions that kill independent labels every single day. That trade is actually what Undercover's scale and ambition required. It's just that nobody inside the original subculture was in a position to even offer it until NIGO came along. But we have to be honest about this. None of this means there's nothing to mourn. The Urahara scene was genuinely something. It was an actual subculture with its own logic. That is gone. Not because it failed, but because it won. The decentralized, friendship-based network of micro-boutiques that defined early 90s Tokyo street culture has been fully absorbed into a publicly traded corporate syndicate governed by Japanese corporate law, quarterly shareholder reporting, and public market accountability. The Urahara era is over. But the era of the sovereign Japanese creative conglomerate has just started. NIGO isn't just designing clothes anymore, we all know this. He's designing the infrastructure that decides which creative legacies survive the next 50 years. And crucially, he's doing it with Tokyo as the center of gravity instead of Paris or New York. And that means something. Whether the sovereign creative conglomerate turns out to be a better protector of creative culture than the permanent underground was, that is still an open question. We don't have the answer to that now. Institutions have their own logic. Corporate structures have their own pressures. But the argument NIGO is making with this acquisition is that the alternative, the fragmentation, the independence, the vulnerability to external acquisition, that was a losing battle. If Japanese fashion was going to be institutionalized anyway, was better to do it themselves on their own terms before someone else did it for them. And that's probably the most honest read of what happened with the human-made acquisition of Undercover. Not a betrayal of the underground. The underground fully matured, deciding it was done being vulnerable. And that's the kind of structural shift that we try to actually see right here on The Casual. Not just the headline, but what the transaction reveals about how creative economies actually work. And if that is useful to you, support us through YouTube membership. It funds the work that we do here directly. But let us know what you think about this acquisition of Undercover by Human Made Inc. This is major, this is big news. We've had conversations amongst the team here about is NIGO saving a lot of these brands from solvency, or is Human Made as a conglomerate going to end up being kind of like the savior of Japanese independent brands that are in the same vein as Undercover? I mean, it's all up in the air now, but this is the first major move to see exactly what's on the plate at Human Made Inc. In some ways it's scary, but in some ways you're like, it could be no other way. So let us know what you think in the comments. As always, keep it locked right here for all of your info in international fashion, culture, and business from Tokyo, and keep it casual. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. And I will see you guys in a minute. Peace.